So welcome, Rachel. Rachel's our special guest tonight. Rachel is the author of Best Women's Erotica of the Year, Volume 7. I think she's published all 7 of these. She's an erotic specialist, erotic writer, anthology producer. She's always looking for contributors. And we're here to have a conversation with her about her new book. And she's also offered a giveaway of the book. Is that right, Rachel?
Yes. I don't know where everyone is, but I can give away 3 copies within the United States. So if you are in the US, you are eligible.
I'll cut in there one last time just to say that I'm also going to drop that link in the chat. You can click on that form to register to enter the giveaway, and I'll also email it out after the effect to everyone who is here.
All right, but it's the first 3 people who request it, correct? 3 giveaways in the
I'm going to randomly draw 3 names.
Randomly draw 3 names. Okay, fine. So everyone should enter their names. If they're interested, they'll be randomly drawn.
Guys, go ahead without me. And we'll do it again. Okay, bye-bye.
Okay, I've muted her. All right, so welcome, Rachel. Wait, I'm gonna view it so I can see you in speaker so I can see you better. So Rachel, I think probably, I mean, we'll take questions from the audience, but my question for you is, how did you get into this? How did you get into writing erotica?
Well, I always like to say I got into it by accident because that's really how it feels a long time ago, but I don't know if anyone else feels this way, but I'm 46. And when I say, oh, 25 years ago ish, it seems weird to say that. Like, it feels like it was much shorter ago. But back in 1999, I was at the end of my time at NYU Law School, which was not going very well. And I did not graduate, but I somehow stayed for 3 years. And I was reading a lot of erotica. I had started reading erotica in college, and I saw a call for submissions for a book called Starfucker, which was about celebrity erotica. And I thought, well, I've been reading it long enough. I can try to write my own story. And I wrote a story called Monica and Me, which was about Monica Lewinsky and a character who has a lot of characteristics like me, like my clothes and my name. And it was kind of this fantasy.
You look unlike Monica Lewinsky, right? There is a little bit of some similarity in your appearance.
It was actually inspired by, I can't remember which tabloid, but one of the tabloids had an article that said something like, Monica has a crush on women in the White House. And it was about that. And I thought, well, what if, Monica was bisexual? And what if, I don't know. So it was about this woman who picks up Monica and they have this fling. And I mean, it was very sexy, but it was also had a sweet side. I think I had a line, which it reminded me of when I was watching Impeachment, American Crime Story. I think it said something like, I could treat her better than the Bill Clintons and the Andy Bleilers of the world. And that was her other married lover who was really not good to her. So, I published, that got published in that Starfucker book, and it also got published in Best Lesbian Erotica 2001, which is also from the same publisher that I work with now. And that was super exciting. And
yeah, it was like your first story out of the gate. It gets published in that's amazing.
I was pretty nerdy, and I always wrote nonfiction. So this was my first time writing fiction, and it was really exciting. I mean, I could still remember before I got my copies in the mail, I saw it in a bookstore. It was a bookstore that no longer exists, like the Barnes and Noble in Chelsea. But I remember standing there and like seeing it and holding it in my hands, and I cried. It was just so exciting. And I called Tristan Taormino, who was the editor of that Best Lesbian Erotica. I was like, oh, my story. I mean, it was really exciting to see it in a book, not just, even though I knew it was going to happen, that was really exciting. And what's really cool now, fast forward 1999 to now, is like, I get to be that person for a lot of writers who are new to erotica or new to getting their stories published. Like, I get to publish their first stories. And sometimes I don't always know that, but sometimes they put it in their bio. This is, this is so-and-so's first published story. And that is really, that never gets old. That's really exciting for me, because I feel like I'm still that person in some ways who just, I remember that excitement. And so I love getting to do that now as an editor.
So I have to back up for a sec, because you spent 3 years in law school, but you didn't graduate. That's a long time to spend in law school.
I spent many more years paying off my student loans for that time. So if anyone has questions about why maybe you should not jump right in, and I also like graduated college in 3 years, and I just thought I knew everything because I was 20 years old when I started at like law school. Like I just thought, oh, why would I take a gap year? Why would I do this? I know what I want to do because I thought I did. And turns
Mhm.
out I did actually like some of the classes like First Amendment and constitutional law, but I did not want to do the actual sort of tedious work of being a lawyer. I mean, I guess every job has tedious work, but I felt like you're never done researching. You could always be researching more. And ironically, I think the same is true for writing. You could always be tweaking your writing and never sending it in because you can always find things that you want to change. And I mean, I find things I want to change in stuff I've already published, but it's
Totally.
too late
Yeah.
and you just have to move on. So,
Right.
I mean, I
Right.
still feel that way. So,
Yeah. So that's kind of amazing. So you were like 23 years old, 24 years
yeah.
old, and you published your first story. Are you bisexual? Were you
Yes.
at the time bisexual?
Yes and yes. And it's interesting. There's a whole other life to that story because that got published it was called Best Lesbian Erotica in 2001 and Starfucker, but they were published in late 2000, I think. And a couple years later, I met a woman who found me through that story. Like she had read it and she was also a fan of Monica, and we wound up dating. And
Oh,
yeah, so like that story really did take on a life of its own. And I mean, we're no longer together, but we're still friends. And it's so funny to me that that even happens.
yeah, that's great. Did Monica ever read it? Do you know?
Well, I don't think she read it, but she does know it exists. This is, I feel funny telling you this 'cause it's not my story to tell, but my ex-girlfriend like dropped off a note at the archive building where Monica used to live, and Monica called her. Now that's all I know. I don't know what the note said. I don't know exactly what they talked about, but so Monica does know it exists if she remembers this from many, many years ago, like 2003.
All right. So then, yeah, so you're like 23, 24 years old and you've written this story. Does it become clear to you, like, I want a career in erotic writing, or what
No,
was your process?
not, I mean, that really took much longer. It was sort of a process. I was coming out of law school and I took this very boring admin assistant job and then a typist job. Like I was doing these jobs that were just, for money, and they were fine, but I was trying to kind of figure out what I wanted to do. And um, I had gone to some writing event, and a woman who was an editor at Penthouse Variations, which was a subset of Penthouse, like saw me there, and she reached out. They were looking for someone who was an editor. So I kind of, that then became my full-time job, was working in erotica. And then I also got asked to edit and co-edit my own anthologies a couple of years after publishing more short stories. So it all kind of fell into place. And then that became basically what I did. And then also I got asked to write a sex column for the Village Voice. This is all around that was in like 2004 to 2007. So, in the 2000s, that all just sort of happened. And then all of a sudden, one day I was like, oh, this is what I do.
I have a career
I've
as a.
left law and all of that way, way behind.
So was it a surprise to you, this evolution? Like, or did it make sense? Were you always interested in being frank about sex? Were you always open about your sexuality? Where did you grow up?
Now it makes sense, like now when I look back, but I would say if you told me in high school that this is what I was going to do, not at all. I mean, I didn't grow up at all with any like shame around it, but I wasn't super outspoken about it. And I didn't really think about it. Like I wasn't even having sex in high school. And I mean, I read some steamy books, romance, but I wasn't reading erotica. Like I didn't discover that until college. And even then I thought it was cool. I thought it was interesting, but I never thought I could do this because I was reading also really like political science books and I wanted to be a lawyer. Like, so I don't know, it feels like it sort of found me. I mean, I found it, but it also feels like it kind of found me. And I don't, I sort of have this feeling that if I set out to do it, maybe it wouldn't have come out the way it did, but
That it was kind of one of these organic things.
yeah, like it was each little thing. It was writing one short story and then writing another one and then being asked to co-edit a book and then edit my own and then, doing this. And I also really like the fact that I write both nonfiction and I write erotic fiction. I don't write any other kind of fiction. I mean, I might someday, but so I've written very frank, personal pieces about my own sex life, which not everyone does or has to do, and most erotica writers I know use pseudonyms, and I use my real name, which has pros and cons. That
Yeah.
means my entire family knows what I do for a living, and if they're at a bookstore, or if someone Googles their name, they might find me. I mean, it definitely is a mixed blessing, I would say.
Where do you publish your nonfiction pieces?
Mostly online, places like Salon, or a lot of opinion pieces. And those are, I mean, I've written about everything from like being in debt to being a hoarder to my sex life. And in some ways, writing about sex feels easier than writing about really other personal things. But I know for a lot of people, it's the opposite, like, or everything's, I think some people are just more open to talking and writing about their life, whether that's on social media or in writing. And it's funny because both of my parents, who are divorced and who are very different, but they're both very private. They would never write about something personal online, or really any, they just, that's not what they do. But my grandfather wrote a memoir about his time as a POW in World War II. And I think he and I have more in common because he's a writer. Not that he writes erotica, but he has no problem with me writing about my life. I mean, he'll tell me if he disagrees with something I'm doing. Like I wrote an essay about loving to play bingo and spending money on it, and he told me, I think that's irresponsible, which that's fair. I feel like if you put yourself out there in that way, it is fair if people are going to comment. You can't expect them not to. But I really do think that some people feel that urge and find it cathartic to write about their lives. And then some people find it similarly cathartic to write fiction, whether it's erotic fiction or other things. But I think, for me, those are really different. Like when I write erotica, I'm not, even when I'm writing about myself, I know it's fiction. But when I'm writing an essay, it really feels more like almost like therapy or therapeutic to make sense of something, especially something difficult or something that where like I don't understand my own behavior, or I don't like my own behavior, or I'm grappling with something. Usually nonfiction, I write about the stuff that I can't stop thinking about. And that's probably the case for my erotica too. Like the things that I've written about, certainly that are from my personal life, are the things that I've just thought about a lot. And actually that reminds me, I once dated a guy, and then a couple of years before I started writing erotica, and then later he got in touch with me, or I ran into him somewhere, and he said, "Oh, did you ever write erotica about me?" And it was really a weird, like, I didn't know what to say, because I didn't. And what do I say? Like, I felt like I was insulting him to say I didn't, but you can't just, I don't know, you need some sort of like inspiration for a story. It can't just be, oh, okay, I was with this person and it was really great and we had great sex in the end. You still need the drama of a story.
Well, but presumably in a relationship with someone, there was some drama or something went on.
Yeah. Yeah. I've definitely had good sex with people that I didn't write erotica about. And that's not to insult, the experience I had with them. So, and I don't write as much personal erotica now because I'm in a 10-year monogamous relationship. And not that, I have written some about my partner, and some I've used a pseudonym because it's different when you're single or when you're not in a serious relationship versus where everyone knows your partner, and if you're publishing something about them, it is different.
Right. I was about to say I relate to a lot. I'm not the writer. I haven't written nearly as much as you are, but as you have, but I've written a bit too. And I always write personal essays. And I used to find when I started writing in my 30s and 40s that it was so therapeutic. I completely related to what you were saying. But now that I've become a little more of a public, like with the Wolfer and stuff, I don't really want to write anymore so much personal essay, because I feel like it's, because if I can't write about my partner or my children, right? So many of the things that would be personal, it just feels too complicated, too messy for them, which
I
is
heard
kind of
this
a
great
bummer.
line. There's a really good podcast called Right Minded, WRITE, and they interview memoir authors, a lot of memoir, but also fiction. Anyway, Michelle T, who's a memoirist and a novel writer, she said that she's going through a divorce and she's a parent and her mom is coming to live with her. And on the podcast, she said, you know, I wish I could write more about my mom, but she's coming to live with me, so I can't really write about that relationship. And it was so interesting because she was talking about hypergraphia, which is this like the urge to write, and it's there's a lot of scientific stuff about that, but she was comparing it almost to an addiction, not necessarily in a bad way, but that urge, like she was talking about, to really make sense of things via writing, mostly for yourself first. I think that, to me, that's a big myth that people say, oh, well, why are you writing about this really personal thing? And I think they think it's just exhibitionism or just oversharing. And I find it the total opposite. I mean, yes, it is sharing, but I don't think it's so. They also make it sound like it's one-sided, like I'm only sharing and I don't want feedback. But when I was 19, I wrote an essay about my dad's alcoholism for Parade magazine, you know, that comes in the Sunday paper. And this is, I think, whatever, 1999. No, 80, what, I don't know, 1975 I was born, so plus 19. Okay, so, and I got letters from other teenagers and young people, like letters, snail mail letters, because email wasn't as widespread. And that was so moving to me. I wish I still had those letters, because
I totally understand. No, when you write something and it resonates with people, and particularly when it's something personal. I mean, I've learned this so much in the Wolfer community. Like when you share stuff that's really real and personal, and it lands and people receive it and it affects them and it helps them in their own lives, that's super, super moving.
And I remember people in my family were offended. You know, my photo was there. I mean, his photo was not in there, but I wrote that at a time when my dad was actively drinking and I really could not talk to him. Like our relationship was very strained and it was really hard. And I wrote that really just to share that feeling, because it was like I couldn't, there was no other way that I really could deal with that. And he wasn't mad at me. You know, and it's funny because sometimes people in my family will say, oh, you know, they'll be telling me something personal and they say, don't write about this. And sometimes I find it a little offensive. Like I do have judgment about what I write about. I don't usually set out to write about someone without their consent, but I also am almost always writing from my own perspective. So, you know, and now I do ask, like I try to ask as a courtesy. You know, I wrote a piece about like last year wanting to visit family but not feeling safe doing so, and my stepmother had passed away, and I said to my dad, like, can I write about that, can I mention that? And he basically said, write whatever you want. Like,
Right.
and I think it is hard to understand if you're not the kind of person who shares things with the world, whether it's
Right, which a lot of people aren't. I mean, my last two boyfriends said to me unequivocally at the beginning of the relationship, do not ever write about me. Like,
what did you say though?
I said, I'll do my best, to something to that effect. I mean, what am I supposed to say?
It's like, how do you, I mean, I think one of the reasons I appreciate my partner, who is much more private, I mean, he doesn't even understand why I post things on Facebook like I'm getting a new computer. And to me, I'm posting it because I want to know if other people have the same computer, or do you have any advice?
No, I totally get it. We are of the same ilk in that way. Yes.
But he's really, I think he doesn't understand it, I don't think, on that level, because he writes plays and he writes fiction and he doesn't, it's not as direct. Like for him, he makes abstract art, and I write very personal essays that are about like my life. So, but I think he's kind of come around to the fact that I'm not doing it out of a malicious place. I'm not doing it to like shame him or anything. I mean, I often do write about our conflicts because you know, those are the
Way
things
to work through them. It's a way to understand them.
the fact that like we make dinner every night and watch Jeopardy is not really a subject for a personal essay.
No, no one would care. That's right. All right. Well, let's go back to the erotica.
I know,
So
way off
I
track.
think my number one question about writing erotica is, doesn't it get boring?
Well, I'm lucky because I get to edit it also. So like I'm not writing it every day. But I think I think you could probably say that about any genre. I mean, I think it could get boring if you're writing the same setting or the same people or the same sex acts, but there's so many, I mean, there's really an infinite number of things you could be writing about, both people, different kinds of people, different people. Like you could be writing about people like yourself or people different than yourself, and
Yeah.
also sex. Like I think sometimes people feel limited to writing erotica about what they've personally experienced because they think, oh, how could I write about something that I've never done? And I mean, I think there's a lot of tools you can have. I mean, you have the internet, you can look at porn, you can also look at like, threads on places like could be Reddit, could be FetLife, which is a kinky social networking site. And I'm not saying mind someone else's life and lift verbatim their sex life. I'm saying more,
But you can take it as inspiration,
yeah,
right?
and more the mindset. I mean, I think what's really crucial to erotica, in addition to the physical parts, is the mindset of, okay, this person has a foot fetish. So you would want to describe what they're doing with their feet, but also why they're doing it, and not assuming that everyone with a foot fetish or whatever the thing is. I mean, I just pulled that out as an example, but you could have 10 people with a foot fetish and they could all be very different people with very different reasons for that and approaches to that. And I think that's what's important to remember. You're not just writing about a foot fetish, you're writing about that person who's a unique character with their foot fetish and why, what is it about it for them? So I
Right.
think it always comes back to the really personal and emotional and like the humanity part of it, like what makes each person unique.
Right. Well, I wonder, I interviewed a really great doctor, Dr. Batsheva Marcus is her name, and she talks about the importance of fantasy, right? And she talks about the importance that people don't rely on fantasy enough, that we don't read enough, that we don't listen to sexual, I don't know, podcasts like Dipsy enough, that it's so important, particularly as we get older and as our hormones dip, that we really rely on fantasy, which I don't feel like I'm very good at personally. And I wish I was better. How's your, I mean, as a writer of erotic fiction, you must have a pretty good fantasy life, I would guess.
I mean, it's interesting. I feel like I go through phases of like having fantasy, like more fantasies or less fantasies. I mean, I think in general, what's interesting to me about fantasies, both my own and other people's, because through all the various things I've done, I've been privy to a lot of different fantasies. Is I think there's still, even in 2021, people still have a lot of self-judgment about their fantasies, and I'm not even talking about before they even share them with anyone, just in their own mind. I think a lot of people feel like, well, what does it mean if I fantasize about this, or what does it say about me, or what will people think? And I think that inhibits them from even just getting to know their own fantasies, never mind writing it down or sharing it with a partner. I think there's still a lot of shame, I guess, about even just the concept of fantasizing sometimes. Not for everyone, but for some people.
I think that's true. Probably just articulating, we're so hemmed in by, I guess, what feels like societal expectations around sex. I mean, I guess I would say that for myself. Like, I sometimes I feel like I know all the permutations. I can't really think of what something outside of what I already know. I don't know.
I
I feel
think sometimes it's really about, almost like for me, the times when I've had really vivid sexual fantasies and kind of explored them in my head. I've really had to go to almost a different place in my mind, like where no one is there. No, yes, I have shared fantasies with a partner, but I think like the ones that are meaningful to me personally in the really, intimate way, I guess, are ones that just feel really like I own them, like that they're for me. Even if I write about them, I still feel like they're something that exists just for me in that form. I mean, I might share some of it with a partner, but I think it changes when you talk about it in the bedroom, at least a little bit, even if you're saying the words of the exact thing, you don't know exactly the image that if you're like, let's say you're talking dirty about whatever your fantasy is, like they might be picturing one thing and you might be picturing something else. And I think that's great. Like, I think that's what makes the world go around. And that definitely is what makes writing erotica continuing to be interesting to me.
Mhm.
But, you know, and I also think like sometimes we might have fantasies that we don't, or I don't even know if the word fantasies is the right thing, because I feel like some people hear fantasy and they think, okay, that's something I want to try, but maybe it's just an image that turns you on. So for me, writing erotica definitely has helped me tap into some of those things. I've written about things that I wouldn't say are my personal fantasy, but I found it really arousing and sexy to write about for
Mhm.
a different kind of character, and just to think about or to contemplate, and in the context of writing a story about it.
So do things that you read about, because you're constantly receiving submissions for your
Mhm.
anthologies, right? Because you edit these anthologies. So do you find things that you read about that you then bring back to your own bedroom? Like, and I'll pick up on the question from the audience. Is it difficult to continue writing about erotica when you're in a 10-year monogamous relationship? And so I guess I'm asking if your work influences your sex life.
I mean, I think it has, but mostly prior to the relationship I'm in now. I think just, and that doesn't mean, I mean, if I was maybe in a relationship with someone else, it might have be different, but like our sex life is, I don't know, I guess I feel like it's separate in a way, but in the past, yes, it has. I think the thing it's done, being exposed to so much erotica, is just made me think more broadly about sex and the world of sex differently, not as much. I mean, and that has, I'm sure, influenced my personal life in some ways, but I would say it doesn't necessarily influence my relationship now. I think especially because I've been doing this for over 20 years. At the beginning, I wrote a lot of characters who had a lot of things in common with me, both my looks and my outlook on life and my sexuality. Like they were fantasies, often fantasies that I had or things that I had done. An early story I wrote was called Lap Dance Lust, about a lap dance I got at a strip club in LA. And I mean, it's a true story. Everything in it happened.
Mhm.
So that one, um, and there are other stories where something happened, like maybe 10% happened or 90% happened, but I tweak the other percentage to make it fiction,
Mhm.
partly to protect people, but partly for the story, like, because it sounded better to say this or
Right,
that,
right, right.
you
I
know.
had a lap dance once. That was one of my most erotic moments. I had a
I
lap
mean,
dance in a
this
strip
was
club.
at Cheetah's in LA, and it was, I mean, even now, this is over 20 years ago, it was really sexy. And, you know, I write in the story, I can try to find it. I think I have it on my Goodreads somewhere, like that story. But
Oh, I'd love to read it.
it, like, it was really sexy. And even though I know, you know, she was working, and if that's a whole construct and that's a job for her, like, even within that, and it's such a, it was short, it was so short, but it was so like, it still felt intimate. And like, whether it was for her or not, that's still how it felt for me. And I think that's, someone asked like, what do I look for in my anthologies? And I think like that does kind of go to something that I'm looking for, which is to feel what the characters are feeling right along with them. I mean, not whether they're getting a lap dance or whether whatever they're doing, just to feel what they're feeling and to feel like I'm right there with them. And you know, and for it not to feel generic, like for it not to feel like even if it's something I've read about before. I've edited a bunch of anthologies about spanking, which is something I'm less personally into now, but I mean, I was in the past, and I'm still interested in reading about it. But I've edited probably like over 75 stories about spanking, let's say, probably more, who knows. So, but like, does that still interest me? Yeah, if it's told in a way that doesn't feel the same as all those other ones. And I think there's always room for new voices, especially in erotica. That's something I really appreciate. You don't need like an MFA. You don't need writing, specific writing credentials. You also don't need to have had certain kinds of sex or any kind of sex. Like if you have a good imagination and can do justice to the characters you're writing about, like I don't care whether you did these things or not, or if it's inspired by your life. I mean, if it is inspired by your life and you want to talk about that, that's interesting maybe, but I'm not going to judge your story based on that. I'm going to judge your story based on your story.
But it's interesting to me, you say you don't need an MFA. I mean, obviously, to be a good writer, you don't have to have an MFA. But I think what you're saying, you know, I used to be a literary agent, and like what you're saying is true of all writing, right? It's good if it's good, like if it's taking you along and you're understanding, you're feeling along with the author and you're, so I would say the skills of writing good erotic fiction must be the same skills as writing any good fiction, no?
I think, yeah, I mean, in many ways, I think so. I think you do also need, I don't know if this is the right word, but some degree of like empathy. I mean, you have to, I think you really have to not have any kind of sexual judgment of your characters.
Mhm.
I think it will come across if, I mean, maybe you're good enough that it won't come across, but if you are personally offended by something you're writing about, I feel like it's going to be harder to do justice to that in erotica, to make it feel sexy and sensual on the page.
Right,
Um,
so you kind of want an openness.
so I think sometimes people ask me, like, someone asks, what do you look for in a story? Not the sexual topic, but the intensity or how it unfolds. What makes a good erotic story? Like, I can definitely talk about that, and I teach classes about that too. But on some level, it is that I know it when I see it. Like, it is sort of what grabs me. And then when I'm editing an anthology, it's not just that, it's also variety. So there was a case, a couple of, I think volume 5, where there was a story about a mermaid, and I got 2 stories about mermaids that were really good, but I only have room for about 20 or 22, 3 stories. So I felt like, okay, I can't put 2 mermaid stories in the same book because it's just the reader. I want to give them as much variety as possible. So I definitely feel like plot wise, I'm always looking for something a little bit different, a little bit unusual, a little unlike what I've read before, and definitely unlike the other stories that are in my inbox that I'm gonna publish. And there is a story in this book that, there's a couple that really stood out for me, but there's one that did especially. I think it's partly because I do not read science fiction. I've tried, I always have trouble with the world building. It's not that I can't appreciate the writing, I just, my mind is very literal, and I don't want to work that hard to like
Same, I
understand.
have a very hard time with science fiction. So which is your favorite story in this volume?
I don't know if it's my favorite. I can't say that, but like Gravity by Gwendolyn J. Bean,
Yeah.
it just has so many interesting things going on. It's about a woman who works in a gravity play brothel. So she's a sex worker, and it's in this futuristic society where sometimes gravity is really light and sometimes it's really heavy. And so the things she does with her clients like have to do with gravity. And so there's a lot, just that setup alone was really intriguing to me. And yes, that I did have to do a little mental picturing of this world, but she made it easy, and it was only a short story, so it wasn't as hard as like a whole novel set in that world.
I'm going to read just a teeny section from this. I've not read this story yet. I let go just as he pushes up inside me. I feel him penetrate me as we fly, propelled up by his thrust. The trick with aerial sex is figuring out how to push against air. Takes a while for 2 people to discover how to work together, but Nikolai and I have been practicing for over a year now and have a pretty good rhythm down. Anyway, yeah, the gravity thing sounds kind of cool. I guess I'll read this.
Yeah, and like, so yeah, I am not normally a sci-fi person, but that's like an example where I put in my call for submissions, which I'm going to put it in the chat here, the call for submissions for volume 9, because volume 8 comes out next December and volume 9 comes out two Decembers from now. I do want sci-fi stories. Like, I want stories that I would not think of asking for, or that I wouldn't write myself, or that I think readers, like, I want this series especially to speak to people who've never read erotica, and then people who've read tons of erotica but are looking for something new. And to me, that story hit all those buttons because it's sexy, and there's this whole interesting aspect to the gravity, and then there's a sex worker, which, you know, I don't see as much of in erotica and in romance. So, you know, I think the biggest challenge for me as an editor is that I have a limited space. So I can't take every story that I liked reading, like there. And so, in fact, there were probably about a dozen that people submitted for volume 8 that I had to say no to, but that I said to them, if you don't mind waiting a little while, I could either use it maybe for volume 9 or some other anthologies I have coming up. Like I'm doing one on sexy strangers and one of couples erotica. And I got those ideas from stories that people submitted, that there were a lot about those things. And I thought, okay, well, maybe this is worth doing its own book of.
And do you do all these anthologies for the same publisher, for Cleese Press?
Now I do, yeah. I mean, I've worked with various publishers over the years, but now I all my like books are with them. And so, you know, if I have an idea for something, I might say to them, hey, would you be open to this? Like we did one called Come Again, Sex Toy Erotica. And that was really fun because they're not all sex toys like you would think of, vibrators, butt plugs. There's also ice and like household objects, and there's fictional sex toys. And I would love to do another one of those if they let me. So
It's called Come Again. That sounds like a great book. Sex Toy Erotica. Okay.
That one was really fun. And I think those, a lot of them have a little bit more playfulness, not more, but there's playfulness about them. Like there's one where people I think they have to go to meetings. I forget what the meetings, it might be pre-marriage counseling. The one problem with having edited so many books is I don't always remember every detail of the story, but they have to go to these events and they're using sex toys, like they have nipple clamps while they're meeting with whatever important person they have to meet with. So yeah, like that was really fun. Like, and the other thing I do look for is a mix. I mean, this is not helpful necessarily for an individual person looking for advice, but for the whole book of 20 stories, some are going to be more serious and some are going to be a little bit maybe silly or lighthearted. I've published stories about mental health. There was a story about a woman who's agoraphobic, and through the help of a lover, he helps her leave her house and start to work on that issue. And you know, I don't think I would publish necessarily a whole book of mental health erotica because I don't know who would buy that, but I do think that there are ways to write about sex and eroticism that are not just about the fun aspects of life, because sex still happens. I mean, we still feel desire in a different way, but when we're going through a breakup or
absolutely, we're sick or all sorts of, right, we're in war, all sorts of.
I published a story a long time ago by this author, Shanna Germain, about a couple where and I forget how old they are, but it's a husband and wife, and the wife has cancer, and you know, she's had treatment, and he is continuing to treat her really gingerly, like gentle, and she wants him to like use, I feel like I'm just saying the word nipple clamps over and over, but I think she wants him to use nipple clamps. Like she wants him to be rough with her the way they were before, and he thinks he's taking care of her by being more gentle. And to me, I mean, yes, that's the specifics of what that's about and sexually, but that's also so much about like human interaction. And you know, just because you love someone and are with them for a long time doesn't mean you know exactly what they want or how to treat them. I mean, in the bedroom or otherwise. And I think that story really encapsulated that, where, you know, the author can show the reader, you know, those differing perspectives and how they resolve it. And so I think erotica can, I mean, it can just be escapism or masturbation fodder. And that's not, I'm not saying it has to be something more than that. I'm saying it could be something more than that if you want it to be. You know, I think it has the capacity to say things about other aspects of life in addition to sex.
Yeah, no, I'm totally getting that. This is fascinating, actually. So how many stories do you think you've read in the course of your career? And what's your acceptance rejection ratio?
I mean, I've read, I'm sure, thousands, because I do have a list of all the authors I've worked with, and I've worked with over 700 authors, and some of them I've worked with multiple times. So, I mean, I've published over 1,000 stories. So, I mean, yeah. It's usually about, it depends for what book, but like for this series, I'll usually get around 100 to 200 submissions, and I have room for about 20. So
okay.
Like 10 to 20%. But like I said, like if I really like a story and I just can't include it for whatever reason in that book, whether because it's too like something else or it just doesn't quite fit, but if I really like it, like I will reach out to the author and say, hey, I really like this, like could you submit it again, or could I hold on to it? And I do use the submissions I get for any given anthology to brainstorm what else could I pitch to my publisher, like what might work as a concept.
Right. And is it more common in erotica to get unpublished writers, to get first-time writers, you think, than?
I mean, I don't really know how to compare it to like, mystery or something, but I'm definitely open. Like, I don't care if it's your first story or not.
Mhm.
I just really care about, I mean, the thing I care about most is my readers. Like, I want them to enjoy the book, and some of them have read all of the series. So I don't want to repeat
Want to
things.
repeat, right? You want to have new themes. You want to.
And,
It's amazing that you've
Dave-
done 7 of these or 8. You have one coming
Yes,
up.
I mean, I've edited over 70 erotica anthologies total. So, I mean, it's a lot. And I don't remember every single one in detail. I'll remember the general gist of it. But I think that you can tell a story, even if it's like sort of a general theme or a concept that's been done before, if you tell it in a new way, like in your own voice and in a way that feels new.
Yeah,
Why
absolutely.
I don't think, I mean, I always say to myself, like, if I get bored with it, if I just feel like, oh, going through the motions, doing this again, then I'll stop and do
Yeah,
something.
then it's not the right story, or you should be doing something else. Yeah. Of the 7, do you have a favorite? And are there awards for these? Like, has any of these won?
They've won a couple of awards. There's a international, it's called the National Leather Association International. I'm not really sure why there's national and international, but those are for like BDSM kinky books, and some of my books have won awards for those.
It's great.
Do I have a favorite? Out of, well, I can't really choose a favorite from the Best Women's Erotica series, because each one has like, there's just, I don't know, each one has its own thing that I really like. Out of all the books I've edited, there's a one called The Big Book of Orgasms, and those are all really short stories. Each are 1,200 words or less. And some people just hate that. Like, some people are like, these are so short. They're really not a story. They're just the scene. And by the time I got to the end, it was, on to the next one, which that's valid. So if you like longer pieces or only like novels, don't read that. But I wasn't, trying to write. I think it's very challenging to write a short story, a full story with a beginning, middle, and end in 1,200 words.
Yeah.
And not everyone likes that, and not everyone can do that as an author. Like, I think it's great if your shortest thing is 10,000 words, like, that's great. Don't try to cut it down to whatever my word count is. But I have a word count from my publisher, and I try to err on the side of using as many stories as possible so I can say yes to as many writers as possible. So I'm always balancing, okay, I have room for 80,000 words. That could be 16, right? Or whatever 5,000, 80,000 divided by 5,000 is. I could do that many stories. Or if you send me 2,000 word stories, I could do 42,000 word stories, but it usually works out to about 20 to 25. But I'm
Right.
always trying to balance. Like, I used to say up to 5,000 words, but then I didn't have room. Like, I felt like I cut it to 4,000 words so I could have room for more authors. And that's probably just my own people pleasing, because I like to say yes to more authors than say no. And I also want to give readers, I really want to give them variety. Like, I consider this series sort of a sampler plate, and a lot of the authors do have longer works that you can read. So I love when I hear someone say, oh, I discovered this author through your series, and then I went and read their books. Like, that makes me so happy.
Yeah, it's wonderful for the authors. It's so great. Well, this is so interesting, Rachel. Ladies, do you have any other questions? I think this is just fascinating, actually.
I think we might have, let me scroll back and see if we missed a question. But I
I-
am editing volume 9 of Best Women's Erotica of the Year, and the theme for that is temptation. And I try to pick a theme that's broad. Like, the theme for this one is surprise. And that was partly because I was editing it last year during the pandemic, when life was very boring and not, I mean, it was full of surprises with the news, but my day-to-day life was really not full of surprises. And I just thought, I want to be surprised, and I want readers to be surprised, and I just want to see what people come up with. Like, I don't want someone popping out of a cake. Not that there's anything wrong with popping out of a cake, but that's, like, I think what I think of when I think of, okay, a surprise party, but where else can you go with that? What else could be a surprise? So when I picked temptation, I thought, okay, there's really all kinds of temptation. I mean, it could be temptation someone you're not supposed to be involved with and you're involved with. But it also could be temptation of, you have a good, a job you like, a community you like, this, that, but like you're tempted to fly off to wherever and live somewhere else and start a whole new life. Like what about that kind of temptation?
Right. Are there women here in the audience who think about writing erotica? Is anyone tempted to give this a shot? Okay, at least one person. Be curious if there's two. Okay, good. 3, nice. Someone asks in the audience, are any of the erotic stories very sad, or are they mostly upbeat? Lovers parted, sexual issues, etc. That's an
I
interesting
don't
question.
know if I would say very sad. I've definitely written, I wrote a breakup erotica story that Susie Bright, who she's an erotica author, editor, and writer, and she was the editor of the Best American Erotica series that no longer exists, but she told me it made her cry. And like, that's a very awkward, not awkward, but it's she meant it as a compliment, but it's still like a weird thing to do, to write something that makes someone cry, whether it's erotica or not. So, I mean, but I would say the majority are, I would say, upbeat overall, but they do also, many of them deal with real life things that people struggle with, especially women. There's a story in here called, that does have my favorite story title in this book, and one of my favorite story titles I've published, which is called Hot Pockets by Angelina M. Lopez. And it's about a couple who are parents and who struggle with, parenting and finding time for each other and just being their sexual selves amid all the non-sexual, like draining, tiring things
Yeah.
they have to do. And so they're trying to find pockets of time. And it's funny because she told me she was originally going to call it Pockets of Time. And her husband said, what about calling it Hot Pockets?
Mhm. Hot Pockets is super cute. That's
And
great.
I think that I like stories that speak to that kind of real life element, but then find a way to bring it back to something that's erotic. Sometimes I read stories that are really beautiful and well written and as stories, but as erotica, they don't always work because they're so deep into the sort of darker side of life that they don't quite bring it around to make it as arousing as it would need to be. But I
You
think,
really want the stories to be sexually stimulating.
yeah, but not every sentence has, not every aspect of it. Like you can talk about, I always think about like going to a funeral, and I mean, I don't always think about this, but this is one example of like, I think when you're dealing with the really like awful things of life, like sometimes sex can feel like a way to feel something different, to escape that feeling, or to just be in your body or whatever. So I think this, the idea that we're only sexual when life is wonderful is not necessarily true. And I do appreciate erotica that does talk about I mean, there's a story in Best Women's Erotica of the Year, Volume 3, about a woman not overcoming, but dealing with the ravages of like childhood sexual abuse and trying to reclaim her sexuality, and doing so through this leather fetish. And that's by a woman called Dr. J, also known as Donna Jennings. She hosts a really cool Twitter chat on Wednesdays at noon to 1 Eastern. I'll put her Twitter handle in the chat. But like, that's really hard to do. I wouldn't suggest like starting out and trying to write erotica about a dark subject unless like, it takes a certain kind of writer to be able to do that.
Right.
But I'm definitely open to that, but for the most part, I think the tone of the anthologies is upbeat because I think that's what readers want. And some readers, they balk at some of the darker things, or I've definitely, these are all either women or non-binary or, gender non-conforming main characters in these books. But in my other books, it's all genders, all sexual orientations. And that big book of orgasms, sometimes people say, reviewers are like, oh, well, this was good until I got to the male stories. And that's fine, that's your opinion, but I'm not going to not publish a range of sexualities just because one person didn't want to read one type of sexuality.
Absolutely. Here.
Someone asked how many different words for penis or vagina. Let me scroll up. Are there, or do you use, or let me see, have you come across? It's funny because there aren't a ton of words that I like to read in erotica, and sometimes I will change. I mean, I will suggest edits, you know, like member, I don't love. Like, I don't know, just to me, member, sometimes people use that for variety. It's just not like a personal favorite. It just feels, I don't know, I can't get into member. But I've also had people say to me, oh, I like your books, but you use like certain words like, you know, pussy or cunt or this or that, that I can't get past that. And so like, I feel like
People have a lot of
when
preference.
I advise authors, like I would say, if you're writing, write the words that work for you. And then, you know, you can figure out later if they don't work for an editor, you know, that's relatively easy to change.
Right.
Um,
All right, Rachel, our last question is, who is Lady Cheeky? I don't know.
I was just about to answer that. So Lady Cheeky is one of the authors in the Big Book of Orgasms. And because of how Amazon works, it shows up as by her. It's supposed to say it's edited by me and she's a contributor, but sometimes they like switch that so it looks like someone else edited it. And yes, Marissa's commenting, there is a Big Book of Orgasms Volume 2 that is coming out February 8th. And both of those, the first one and that one, have really varied scenarios. I mean, all centered around orgasms. And sometimes people are like, oh, but doesn't all erotica have orgasms? I mean, it might, but it might not. Like my lap dance story, that did not have an orgasm, but I still think it was sexy. So yeah, let me put my website, which is really where like I'll put my page for calls for submissions, and that's where I will have 2 new ones that I'm going to post sometime in January, that one for sexy strangers and the one for couples erotica. So if you want to,
and if you could also please say that aloud, Rachel, for anyone listening to this when it's a podcast, that'd be great.
Yes, okay, rachelkramerbussel.com/call-for-submissions, or just go to rachelkramerbussel.com and there's a call for submissions section. And those calls should be up from sometime in January through probably May 1st. That's another thing I work out. I try to give authors as much time as possible to write, but then I need a couple months to go through everything. And sometimes I have a lot of back and forth with the authors, and sometimes I basically am like, I like this, I made a few edits, can I use this? So it really depends. I will say the biggest edit I give, like the most common edit I give, is I want to know more about how it felt. Like not just what they did physically and who moved what where, but how did it feel for them? Like what were they thinking? And was this like the sex they've had before? Or was it different than the kind of sex they'd had before? I think there's so much you could explore within a sex scene. Karen is asking, oh, can I answer one more question?
Yes, of course. And I also want to ask, how much do you pay for the stories that you publish?
Okay. I do also teach erotica classes, and I also do consulting with authors if you have a manuscript or you have an idea and want one-on-one information. I teach classes. I am working on a class that I'm intending to teach on Teachable, like on my own, but that is a longer project. So I will be teaching one in late January for Shebop, which is a feminist sex toy store in Portland, Oregon. So I'm going to put Shebop's link, and if you sign up for their newsletter, you'll find that out. I think we're posting that in the next like week or 2.
We should maybe get you to teach a class, Rachel, for Revel Experts, which we're launching in February. I'll email you separately.
Yeah, I love teaching because I think people just bring so much curiosity, and people, I would say the vast majority, and don't feel like you have to do this, but most people who take my classes, they have some ideas percolating. I think mostly what I do is give them guidance on how to kind of unlock those ideas. Okay, payment. So this anthology series, I pay $225 a story, and you own the rights to it, but it's exclusive to the book for 1 year. My others usually pay anywhere from like $75 to $100. So you're not, gonna be able to like retire on that money, but you could use it elsewhere. And I mean,
Published.
it's also a good stepping stone if you want to write a book of your own short stories, or you want to write a novel. Like it is like publishers like you having some credits. And there's a couple one or two sites I want to call out. There's a site called Read Aurora, which I don't know if I'm saying that right, but they publish nonfiction erotic short stories, and there's a lot of really great stuff on there you can read. And then the Erotica Readers and Writers Association I'm having a problem getting to their site, but it's supposed to be erotica-readers.com, but that link is not working. But that's a site I've been reading since I started writing erotica back in the late 90s. And they have all kinds of, I post my calls for submissions when I'm looking for erotica, and they are just a huge resource. Okay, I found it. I would bookmark them, and like they have mailing lists, and they have so many resources. They have publishers and editors will post there when they're looking for authors. They have columns about the craft of writing. They have mailing lists where you can chat with people, and you can also workshop your writing. They have so much there. It's a really great site.
Oh, great. Well, Rachel, thank you. This has just been amazing. So interesting to talk to you.
Thank you. This was fun. I'm sorry to everyone who wanted to hear about erotica, and we veered way off into these other things, but I enjoyed it. So I hope
I enjoyed it too. I really enjoyed talking about writing with you and enjoyed getting to know you better. And